we go. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the worldwide ailment that afflicted everyone and caused massive shutdowns during 2020. That one. Yes. So, it is what it is. We all know what happened. We all lived through it. But the blog is more about where it came from, the origins of it. Something that can be a difficult subject for people because, again, people want to place blame and people want to immediately jump into conspiracy theories and that sort of thing rather than openly, willingly discuss where it could have come from in a scientific manner. Just focus on the fact that a previously unknown new virus reared its ugly head and reminded everyone that we are not immune to Mother Nature. We have not removed ourselves from the natural cycle of things, no matter how much people, like certain professors I had in university, I had a biology professor, for example, at university, who swore that, we had basically, as human beings in science and all that, removed ourselves from the natural order of things and we're above it at this point because we can just cure anything and fix anything, and she was full of it. So anyway, what I think the origin of said virus was extraterrestrial. And I'm not saying aliens delivered a package. When I say extraterrestrial, I mean it did not originate on this planet. It fell to this planet. And there are a number of means by which something can fall to this planet. There's every day viruses are falling to Earth from space. We know this. This is a thing. During that time, late 2019, during the month of December, we had an interstellar extraterrestrial visitor. Borisov's comet came through. And if you recall, Borisov's comet also came from the Pleiades star system. So here we have an object from another solar system entering our solar system and passing relatively close to Earth. And, comets, they have tails, they tend to be comprised of ice and various molecular, like viruses, for example, enzymes, amino acids, whatever. Anything that can potentially influence living organisms here on Earth by falling into our atmosphere and making us all sick. Now, if you look at past, I don't want to say that big P word, I don't want to say demic, but if you look at past ailments, global ailments that have done significant damage to the population, for example, the Black Plague. I can say the Black Plague. We can discuss the Black Plague and not get canceled, right? Yeah. Okay. If you look at something like that, you could say, potentially, every so often, something like that occurs, something major, a major illness, ailment, and theoretically, this has been going on forever, since the beginning of time. So, it's possible that due to other factors, external factors, extraterrestrial factors beyond our planet, comets, asteroids, other interstellar objects traveling by, passing through, depositing bits and molecular material here and there, and then that material falling to Earth, we experience these sorts of things periodically. So my theory is that as Borisov's comet, an interstellar visitor, traveled close enough and its tail left a trail of molecular material, a novel virus similar to viruses that we already have on this planet, because just because something comes from another solar system doesn't mean that that solar system doesn't have the same microbes, the same, or at least similar materials as what we have in our solar system. It's close enough to us. The Pleiades solar system could very well have the same ingredients, if you will, and just due to differing climates, differing atmospheres, different environments in general, it developed, the ingredients evolved and developed just slightly different than the ones here on this planet. So a SARS virus on this planet would be a bit different than a SARS virus from the Pleiades solar system. And rightfully so, when you're considering that viruses are all the time changing anyway. They're changing, they're mutating, they're adapting, they're doing all sorts of things. So it's more than possible that a SARS virus traveled here, and because it was different, new and different than what we already have here, it affected us more. We didn't have the resistance to it. And I just want to take a moment to point out that I made a prediction when all of this first started. I made a prediction in like January of 2020 that because it was a SARS virus, it would probably make kitty cats sick as well. I work in veterinary still, and I also know a thing or two about viruses, having done that first. So I made the prediction that it would affect kitty cats. The reason being is because a SARS virus to a kitty cat is like a rhinovirus to us. Typically we get colds from rhinoviruses, and they get colds and upper respiratory schmutz and whatnot from SARS viruses. So this just kind of points out how much guessing went into, because nobody knew. When it comes to a new virus, you just sort of make educated guesses based on prior knowledge to similar viruses, which is more or less what everyone was doing. There is no real blame to be placed. Nobody could have possibly known anything. Everyone was just guessing. Now, why anybody would make the assumption that a SARS virus wouldn't affect kitty cats, I don't know. I guess because it was affecting us, and there's this wide belief that viruses aren't going to, if they affect one species, they're not going to affect another, but we see it all the time because they change and adapt and adjust, and it's a thing. It's just the reason a lot of times that organizations want to try and, I guess, quell that conversation is because they don't want people to panic. Because if people panic, the damage that panic does is worse than what is likely to occur if the virus should affect multiple species, if that makes sense. Like, it's not so much that anyone has malicious intent here. It's more, in order to avoid scaring people or causing unnecessary panic or causing unnecessary irrational behavior in people, it's like a reassurance. Doctors and organizations and stuff, they want to be reassuring. They don't want to give you the worst case scenario and make you panic outright, because that just makes the situation worse. So, although I understand that, I don't agree with the policy of not being open about not knowing. A lot of times, while they're trying to reassure people to avoid panic, they're making it sound like they're already an expert on it. They're making it sound like we have all the answers, it's fine, there's nothing to worry about, we know everything, we can handle everything, and that's not the case. I just want people to be honest and come out and say, we don't know any more than you know. We might be the experts, but we've never seen this before either. We are doing our best and making our best guesses based on similar viruses that we know of, and still collecting data and still trying to compare, but we don't know. I just want them to be honest and say we don't know, because that's part of what causes damage later on. And when I say damage later on, what I mean is the chaos. If you're trying to avoid panic, to avoid irrational behavior and people harming one another and fallout from that, it's also best to avoid misstatements. Don't say something with so much certainty that you don't actually know and you can't guarantee, because later on it's going to come back to really bite you in the you-know-where, because people are no longer going to trust you. If you make that kind of prediction and you are just so certain of it and then you turn out to be wrong, now you've created distrust. So good luck quelling the panic then. At that point, the damage is done. And now you do have a problem of conspiracy theories flying and people pointing the blame and people not listening to you anymore, because you have just demonstrated your arrogance. You cannot come out and say with any kind of certainty that you know that this is going to be fine and this isn't going to affect this and this. You can't do that. So I found that whole thing to be rather reckless. And me, when I say I made a prediction, I don't mean that I told everybody, oh, I know it's going to affect kitty cats. I mean, I said, I don't see why it wouldn't. When people came into the veterinary office where I work, when people come into the animal hospital and they were concerned because their kitty cats were getting sick, and they said, well, I tested for COVID, I don't know if they have COVID. Oh crap, I said it. I don't know if I can say it, but I did. When they said that they had it and they tested for it and they were concerned that they might have given it to their kitty cat, I wasn't going to tell them, oh no, it's fine. Instead, I asked, we used the IDEX laboratories, I asked IDEX, I said, hey, do we have a test for this? Can we test for this in kitty cats with the upper respiratory? Can we see if they're testing positive for it? We did pretty quickly, pretty early on, get an IDEX test for that. Cost a pretty penny for those who wanted to get it done, but hey, we were able to test for it. And sure enough, it didn't take long. It was maybe 3 months later, a bunch of tigers became sick, and then everyone's like, oh, well, I guess kitty cats can get... Yes, they can. It's a SARS virus. They're probably the intended host. It was probably a fluke that we got it as people, and I'm guessing the only reason is because it was something brand new that we had no prior exposure to and therefore no resistance to as of yet. Because otherwise we're exposed to SARS viruses all the time. I mean, especially those of us who have kitty cats, and while SARS viruses could potentially make a person sick, like they normally don't. Normally we get the rhinos. So I don't understand why that was so surprising to everyone. But you see what I mean by the chaos and the guessing. No one knew. That was the point. It was brand new. No one knew. So some of the other accusations that came out of that, I mean, there were blatant political agendas right there, could not ignore them in those accusations. So the damage that was inflicted upon people like me, I knew it was going to happen from day one. I knew it was going to happen the moment the report came in that China had made a discovery, or China had reported a new virus. I knew what was going to happen, because I lived through the United States foster care system. I was put in the American foster care system. I am Japanese. I have always been hated. I was put in the American foster care system prior to 9/11 happening. So I've been experiencing hate crimes for a very long time. I know how the U.S. feels about Asians in general. Because prior to 9/11 happening, Pearl Harbor was the biggest thing to have happened to the U.S. And I knew how racist people in this side of the world could be. I knew ahead of time. And I stopped going out in public long before the actual lockdown, because before it was ever even reported, before the first case was ever even reported in the Western world, over here on this side of the globe, I had people. Normally I think I can pass for white at a distance. I think I can put my glasses on, and I'm fair-skinned enough. I think I can blend in with white people, more or less, normally. But racists have a sort of radar. If there's a racist, they will spot you across a crowded grocery store during the most chaotic times. And that is what happened to me. And I knew that if these people were approaching me early on, this was January 2020, if they were approaching me, and I was having multiple incidents like this every week before it ever even got bad over here, then I was already aware of how it was going to be for other Asians on this side of the world. I was already aware of the racism we were going to face. And I have to say, I hate that I was not surprised by any of it. I hate that I had predicted that as well. I hate that that came to be as well. Because I would have thought the world knew better and could do better by now. Then again, I thought the world knew better and could do better by now when I was taking the engineering courses for my engineering degree at university, and was the only female in a class of 43 students, and faced some questionable comments at best. That's the nice way of putting it. So, you know, the world has really not come as far as what I had hoped. And I think when we experience tragedies like this, when we experience difficult times, you see both the best and the worst that humanity has to offer, no matter where you are in the world. You see the worst in human beings, because we are all human beings. We are all Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens are chaotic neutral alignment, okay? So we have the capability of being anywhere from lawful good to chaotic evil. We have the capability of rising above and demonstrating a great deal of good and compassion and selflessness, but we have the ability to inflict further damage and demonstrate all of the worst traits that any living being can possess. And unfortunately, whenever any sort of disaster, tragedy, anything like this occurs, that's what you get. You get both. And oftentimes you don't hear as much about the good. You don't hear as much about the triumph and the selflessness and those good stories that bring you to tears in the most heartwarming way. Because the media doesn't focus on that. The media wants to focus, for rating purposes, they want to focus on all the negative, and they want to add fuel to the fire. They want to perpetuate the hate and make it worse. And I always thought the media were supposed to remain objective, but the media hasn't been objective for years. So it's not that there's so much hate and so much violence in the world. It's not that people are so evil and so bad and that we're all out to get one another. It isn't that. It's that you aren't hearing as much about the good. You're hearing all of the bad because the media wants those ratings, and that's what was going on. A lot of negative was going on top of all of the feelings that were occurring. Because people were scared, people were hurt, people were dying, so people were hurting from loss. There was so much confusion, as really you couldn't comfort the populace. No government could possibly hope to really comfort the people, because the governments were struggling to figure out, okay, how do we deal with this? What is this? How do we deal with this? What can we tell people? How can we reassure people? Because they didn't know. I feel like I have to keep emphasizing that they did not know. It was new. There's no way you can place blame on anyone. The reason so much blame was placed on China and so much scrutiny was placed on China is because China was the first of the governments to say, you know what? This is not an influenza virus. Because if you recall, in November, December, anywhere in the world really, during that time, there was a lot of, like, you had influenza A and B and everything else going around, and there was a lot of traveling to and from for the holidays, so it was spreading everywhere because people were all over the place. That's what happens during the holidays. You have people traveling, visiting family, going here, going there, and bringing their viruses along with them. Typically, we're talking rhinos and influenza viruses. But people were dying. And people die from the influenza viruses, any of them. Our regular common influenza viruses, people die from them all the time. You can find those statistics on the World Health Organization website because they monitor this. They see, all right, are the vaccines for this year, are they effective? How effective are they? Are they working? Are they not? And there's a whole lot that goes into that. And the thing is, the reason people don't panic about it is because we're just so used to it. People do die from the flu. People do die from the common cold. And there's nothing anyone can really do about it. It's unfortunate. It's part of Mother Nature. It happens. So, a SARS virus, another common family of viruses here, a SARS virus, it can happen. But we're not used to that. And it was unexpected. But China noticed that this was not an influenza. This was something else. And they did the right thing. They locked down their people. They tried to manage it. They followed their own protocols. They have protocols for their people. Any other country would have done the same thing. Follow their own protocols, whatever protocols they have in place specific to their country. And China reported it. China said, hey, we've got people dying and we don't think it's from the flu. So really, that's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to report. And it works its way up the chain. It gets to the World Health Organization and they investigate and they try to figure out what this is. But because China did the right thing and reported it, next thing you know, you've got conspiracy theories flying around that that's the origin of it. Well, no, not necessarily. And we have since proven that there were cases, simultaneous cases, around the same time that China documented their first case, their first known case. There were other cases. And it was already over here on the western side of the world, but everyone over here, and I do mean everyone over here, was already sick. On this side of the world, influenza B was taking out a lot of people at the time. So it's just that nobody over here, the hospitals didn't think to report it. They didn't think, people were dying without verification of having the flu, and the hospitals were just like, oh, well, they had the flu. They had probably B because that's what everybody's having problems with. It was already a thing over here. So they didn't report it. Had the U.S. reported it, had the U.S. discovered it and reported it, everyone would have been pointing fingers at the U.S. That's just how that works. Just because someone figured it out first does not mean that they created it, they made it, they did this. So that whole thing just led to further racism and a whole lot of back and forth. And what all of that chaos does is it takes away from the focus. It takes away from the science and the research and the focus of actually figuring out what this is, how do we deal with it, where did it come from. Everyone was just so distracted. There's the danger. Everyone's so distracted of placing blame and forcing political agendas and using tragedy to further their own personal agendas that they neglected to do the proper research. That is what happened. You would think that with all of the past ailments that we have experienced throughout humanity's history, with all of the past experience and past information we have, and all of we've been sort of preparing for it in a way. All of the science fiction, the books, the movies, the stories that people have, writers and producers and all have put together and tried to sort of, what if this happened, these sort of apocalyptic scenarios and how people would react. Honestly, I went back and watched Contagion. There were quite a number of it was like Contagion came out, maybe 11 years before, something like that, at least nearly a decade before that incident. And it was just almost like a premonition. It was very spot on how people behaved and reacted and the media and all of that. So, you would think with all of that information, we'd know to behave a little better. We'd try a little harder. We could potentially avoid those situations. That's not what happened. I just think we could have done better. All of us, all over the world, all the governments, everybody, the whole thing could have been handled better, regardless of the fact that it was new and nobody knew what to do. The emotions and the blame and all of that could have been handled more maturely and more objectively. And had people focused on the important things, such as finding treatments for it, finding a way to deal with it, finding a way to alleviate the overly stressed medical systems and the emergency workers and all of that, and had people focused on trying to find a reasonable, scientific, natural origin of this thing, I feel like there wouldn't be as much blame and racism. There wouldn't have been as much of a political shit show as there was. And also, people may have noticed the correlation between the interstellar visitor and that particular virus. I do think that had they focused on that, I mean, knowing the origin isn't necessarily going to help with finding a treatment or a cure. That's something you have to do through trial and error anyway. And they should have focused a lot more on that and taken their time to do it right and not feel pressured and not be under so much pressure. And that was something that could have been handled better as well. But knowing the origin of it should have sparked scientific curiosity and cooperation. Knowing the origin of it should have had people wanting to work together, should have had governments wanting to work together and do more research and further exploration, which may have led to the ability to predict and prevent future pandemics, you know. Had the governments stopped trying to point fingers at one another and work together and saw that if I'm right about the origin of this thing, if I'm right about it having come in on an interstellar object, imagine what the governments could do if they cooperated and put further study into that. They could find potential viral threats before they got here and already started making people sick, and they could prepare for it better. They could start trial and errors. How do we deal with this before it even gets here? The amount of time that it takes to properly test treatments and vaccines and that sort of thing, we really need to be ahead of the game. It just, if they could somehow work together, get the research together to, even if they sent something out, like if they got probes and stuff on Mars, if they sent something out to another planet and was able to get a sample of it somehow as it fell to another planet, then they would have that and be able to work with that prior to it arriving here. Or if they attempted to, because they can, in labs, they can simulate environments of other planets and potentially other solar systems. If they can accurately determine the environment of another solar system, they can simulate what it might be in a lab, and they can see how viruses evolve in those environments and potentially come up with at least a workable vaccine that has a certain percentage success rate. Like, it's not going to be 100% accurate. No vaccine is ever going to be 100% accurate. But if they had a bit more research and a bit more to go on, if they cooperated more and focused on that potential origin, then we might have been better prepared. We might be better prepared in the future. But they didn't do that. They did the worst thing they could have done. They made assumptions, they pointed fingers, and they didn't explore those other possibilities. And then, because of all the conspiracy theories and the panic and the people who did have malicious intent getting on the internet, taking to the internet, and spreading misinformation, because it does happen, it did happen, then they prohibited anyone from offering up theories. I waited 3 years before I put that blog up. We were so careful. I have the other channel, I have the World of Warcraft channel on YouTube. We were so careful not to use certain terminology. We just referred to it as the Blood Plague. And we were all very careful about it because of censorship. So instead of being able to have open conversations and discuss the possibilities like I'm trying to do right now, which again, this may come back to bite me. We will see. But instead of being able to do that, the governments censored us. They didn't want the misinformation out there. Like, they could spread misinformation, and the media could spread misinformation, but the people weren't allowed to say anything on social media because, no. So, everything that they did was pretty wrong, and they should have known better, all of them. But in the future, I would hope that they have learned their lesson and will be more cooperative, less likely to jump the gun and put forth statements. They should have been putting forth questions, not statements. This is an example of scientific arrogance. This is an example of doctors not knowing when to say they don't know. They're too soon to give an explanation and make a statement before they have enough data to go on. And that is the primary issue with the whole thing, because that is what led to misinformation. That is what led to panic. That is what led to the blame game. That is what led to all of it. And that is no particular government's fault. That is no particular person's fault. That is human mindset. That is the collective as a whole. And it's something that everyone needs to strive to rise above. In those situations, you should strive to remain objective. You should strive to ask questions, seek more information, not presume to know anything. When something is new, you can't possibly know anything about it. It's brand new. So that is something that I cannot stress enough. And I do hope that research is still being conducted in an objective manner. Still, I know that they're trying to say that now they think the origin of it is something similar to like what we saw in the movie Contagion, where it came from this animal or that animal or something. And I don't know. I am not sure of the accuracy of that either. I think that's more misinformation. I have no idea. But maybe they're just guessing again. I do think they should have considered the possibility of it being extraterrestrial, it coming from that cosmic event. There's always a cosmic event prior to a massive global ailment. Notice I keep saying ailment. I'm trying so hard. But that is my theory on it. It's just because of the timing, because of the fact that, you know, we didn't know at the time. There wasn't enough information at the time. The reports weren't all in at the time. We didn't have a way of testing at the time. But because we've since been able to determine that the first cases that occurred, they didn't just occur in China. They did occur simultaneously in other parts. We've been able to verify that. So it's a difficult subject still. And that's why it took me so long to do this video for this vlog. I was on a roll there for a bit, and then when I saw which one I was going to have to do next, I'm still hesitant. I'm clearly still hesitant to talk about it. I know for one thing there's still a lot of feelings towards it. For another, I don't know if this is going to get me censored or get me banned or get me in some kind of trouble with someone. It's a very taboo subject. But I think it needs to be discussed objectively and openly, and I think I have a valid theory here. I think I have a valid suggestion as to the origin of it. And personally, I would like to know, is there a possibility that this came from Borisov's comet? Is there a possibility that this was an interstellar virus? If we look at things that way, if we ask those sorts of questions, we are no longer perpetuating hate and fear and violence and all the negative. At that point, we are working together cooperatively, and we are exploring possibilities, and we are learning things together. And I think it's important to do that. And I'm also not making a statement. I'm asking questions. I'm noticing correlations, and I'm asking questions, and I am not pretending to know anything. And I want to make that clear as well. This is not an attempt at further misinformation. This is not an attempt to persuade anyone about anything. This is me saying, I'm curious as to whether or not that interstellar event had anything to do with everyone getting sick at that time. I'm wondering if there's a legit correlation between not just interstellar comets, but like any extraterrestrial body depositing any kinds of microscopic debris, if you will, onto the planet. I want to know if we have reoccurring sort of periodic ailments, global ailments, due to every so often a comet or an interstellar, what did they determine Oumuamua was? Oumuamua happened, it also came from the Pleiades system, and it happened a little bit after, I want to say like 2 years? 2 years after Borisov's comet, thereabout. I want to know if viruses could have been piggybacking on that, because it's a fascinating subject to me. I'm just curious, and the information that we can potentially gain from that, I think, is far more beneficial than determining if someone was at fault. Because even if this was something man-made, even if someone was at fault, what good would it do to prove that? The only thing you gain from that is more hate and more blame. So it doesn't change what happened. It just reignites a hatred and a cyclical pattern of violence that we don't need any more of. We need more information, we need more data, we need more cooperation and exploration. We don't need any more hate and blame and violence. We've had enough. And we certainly don't need any more assumptions from arrogant yahoos who think they know everything because they went to a certain university and have a certain job, and I don't care. The medical field is always changing. The veterinary field, the medical field, science in general, we're always learning new things. It's always changing. We don't know anything. We just continue to make observations and find correlations and ask questions. That is what we are supposed to be doing. Asking questions, applying the scientific method, and just doing our best in ever-changing fields of study. And that is the main focus there. Because we did not do that. And I still don't think we're doing that. I still don't think that we are looking into all of the possibilities that we could be exploring together, cooperatively. So that is all I have to say about that subject. Hopefully you get to see this video and it doesn't get permabanned or something. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my blogs. I am always better at explaining in writing than I am in talking. I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. We writers are just socially awkward that way. So there's more detail, and I feel like I did a pretty decent job remaining objective and explaining my thoughts on this whole subject in the blog. So please give that a like, and stay extra, my fellow terrestrials.